I'd like to propose you one more weaving pattern. Having stepped a bit from our traditional osier-like weaving technique, I've tried the techniques of root-like weaving and wrapping. We've got all of these lessons already. After some more experiments, I felt like trying one more option: herb weaving. At least one of its variations, the one where each coil grabs the previous one. I'm going to show you the detail in the process. It is a bit different from the previous techniques, even though it looks very similar. However, there's an essential difference. First of all, it is work speed. Secondly, the items are much more loose and light-weighted. They are more airy. You can see it clearly on the example of dark items on the light background. There are fewer layers than in the dense and heavy root woven items. So I believe it has the right to be classified into a separate kind of weaving. Another advantage compared to normal osier-like weaving technique is its mobility. You can take it with you wherever you go, and no basic form is needed. It is very convenient to have all the materials within easy reach, especially in summer, which accelerates the process a lot. At first I've tried a melange option of this pattern. I've experimented with purse weaving, alternating different color tubes. Well, it is rather nice looking. Here you can see two different options. The basic tubes are white, woven with red and black tubes alternated. However, after I've tried single-colored option, I like it much better. It makes the bottom pattern and lace more visible. Anyway, I've experienced with different options in order to choose the one I like most of all. So let's start weaving. The beginning is identical to the way we start root woven items and wrapped items. This time I'm not going to tell you in detail of the way I've painted the tubes, because they have been prepared beforehand. I've already told you of the way I did in the previous tutorial on 3D cachepot weaving. You can find the link to the description in the tutorial description below the video itself. So, I've rolled such a ring. Take a tube, press it, glue it a bit with the help of Universal Polymeric Adhesive Dragon. I've been using it actively lately. And weave the first row in the familiar way. Avoid tightening the coils, leave them rather loose. Depending on the number of coils you are going to make, you have to estimate the gap size beforehand. At first, I used to roll a ring around a thin pencil. But then I've chosen this pen as an optimal diameter. But yours may be different. Distribute the coils, I've got 6 of them. Further, I lead a working tube through each coil. It's time to lengthen. Try your best to cut a tube meant for lengthening at a very sharp angle and insert it into another tube very deeply. Earlier I used to tighten tubes with my fingers, but then I discovered such a technique with the help of this Sanal-like stick, which helps me to avoid blisters. I start making double coils from the very first row and try my best to avoid tightening. Now it's time to lengthen the tube of the base too. In order to avoid sharp transition, in the second row I add a second tube of the base. Make a coil. One more. And continue this way up to the end of the row. This way. Continue up to the end of the row. After some experiments with different number of tubes of the base, I've concluded that 3 basic tubes is the optimal quantity. However, I'm adding them gradually. At first I rolled over a ring, then in the second row I'm adding the second tube, and now it's time to add the third one, after which I'll continue working with 3 tubes. Take a note, please. Here I've tried working with 2 tubes of the base. Masters of herb weaving use a bunch of herbs at the base. In our case, we use 2 or 3 tubes instead. I've tried using 4 tubes as a base, however they get too pressed and I dislike the result. That's why I've chosen the optimal option for myself. The basic tubes used as a bunch of herbs. I wrap this bunch with a working tube, grabbing a coil by a coil. While in rod-like weaving, we lead a tube under the row. In this type of weaving, we lead each coil through a coil of the previous row. Here you can weave one row grabbing every coil. Don't tighten the coils too much. The more you tighten the coil, the harder it is to lead a tube through. In my case, I'm using plasticine-like tubes. I enjoy working with them. They are rather flexible and at the same time they are good to keep the shape. Do you see? I've shaped the coil and it remains the way I made it. lead my sewing oil through a coil. I'm using a piece of a barbecue skewer as a knoll. This way, lead it through a coil. And continue this way up to the end of the row. In the current row I don't make any additional coils. In the following row I'm going to make every other coil. But it's up to you, the way you find more convenient. It is the way I weave a round shape, in spiral. As for square shapes, we are going to discuss them a bit later. I do like square shapes too, but let's leave them for the next tutorial. So far we continue weaving a spiral like snail. So I've woven such a circle. It's time to pass from the bottom to the walls. Since our cloth is double-sided, identical pattern from the front and the wrong side, I just turn it over like this, leave the wall vertically and continue. I marked the point where the row starts. There is a longer stitch from both sides. It is where the row begins. So pass on to the wall. This type of weaving is characterized by the following peculiarity. You have to avoid flattening of the basic tubes, especially in the points of turning. Make sure they are located above each other and not bunched together. Well, though herb weavers use a bunch of herbs as a base. However, I've got a different aim. I don't need a bunch, I would like a lace, and I prefer basic tubes to be placed straight above each other. This results in a clear lace effect. So continue weaving this way, lengthening the tubes in the process. Try your best to lay the tubes vertically. Make sure you are getting smooth rows. Let me draw your attention to one more point to prevent you from failures. Don't wait till your tube is over. You'd better cut it when it is still rigid. It is easier to lengthen this way. You know that there are fewer paper layers at the very tube ends, and they are more hollow. Inserting a rigid tube end into another tube will help you avoid most of troubles. And one more point. Take a look, please. If I fail to lengthen a tube successfully, it has slided apart and the tube end has become mossy. I just unroll a coil and cut some more over tube. Well, try your best to avoid it, of course, but if you failed, it's not much of a problem either. Unroll a coil and continue working. The next step after weaving 2 vertical rows is as follows. Reach the end of the 3rd row and perform such wrapping without tying it to the previous row. Then curve a little like this, trying your best to avoid pinches. The tubes are a bit moistened. Continue, shape a small loop like this. Please take a note that you have to estimate the loop size beforehand. Take a look. This item looks balanced, while this loop is too big. I mean, the loop size has to correspond to the size of the whole item. This one is okay too. So make a loop of the proper size and continue weaving. Lead the tubes through the coil following the curve. Such transition points are usually somewhat challenging, but there's nothing too difficult. And continue weaving along the row up to the very loop. So continue weaving until we reach the ring, and let's see. Now you have to decide on the size of these windows. You may leave either 5 coils before the ring unengaged and get a bigger gap like this, or 4 coils and get a narrower gap like here. Here I've left 3 coils unengaged, which has resulted in a gap still narrower. I mean, you have to think over what shape of an item you'd like to get and leave the required number of coils unengaged. Here I've got 5 coils. As for the ring, let's leave 4 coils unengaged and connect the stripe to the 5th coil of the ring. In the same way, we have to leave the identical number of coils from the opposite side in inverse manner. At the turning point, you can make an additional coil, like we did while widening the bottom. It is what I mean under an additional coil. You make it to avoid big intervals between the coils. And weave up to the end, leaving 4 coils from the opposite side as well. And continue weaving this way. I've woven 2 more rows above the ring, and I believe it's quite enough for my item. The 3rd row would be excessive. So I start finishing the rows, getting rid of the basic tubes gradually to avoid sharp transition. Cut the tails carefully. Weave up to the end. The last tail can be hidden here. Try your best to avoid sharp transition. The last row is to be performed in the wrapping technique. This way, continue weaving. As you can see here, I've got a big interval, so I'd better make 2 coils here. Lengthen the tube. As a result, I've got an edge like this. You can see it on the example of different items. I believe this kind of an edge makes items more nice looking. Continue up to the end of the row. So I've done. Now cut the tail and hide it under a couple of coils. Since the tubes are coated, I don't find it necessary to prime the items. I've just covered these items with varnish. That's all, the item is ready. It has only taken me about 3 or 4 hours, which proves my word that this is a fast way of weaving. It is not as laborious as root-like weaving, for example. Well, maybe it's a bit more complicated than our traditional osier-like weaving. Anyway, let us enjoy diversity of life.